ध्वनिर्वर्णा पदम् वाक्यमित्यास्पद चतुष्टयम् यस्याः सूक्ष्मादि भेदे वाग्देवीं तामुपास्महे।
The Electronic Media Production and Research Center EMPRC of Madhya Pradesh Bhoj Open University presents an audio program of English literature. This audio program will be useful to the student of BA first year. This audio program is based on the 7th unit of first paper titled Literature in English from 1550 to 1750 AD. The title of audio program is William Shakespeare's Sonnets. To deliver the lecture on this topic, we have invited our subject expert, Dr. Shubhra Tripathi. Sound edited and presented by Amar Bahadur Yadav. Now let's listen to the audio program, William Shakespeare's Sonnets. Today we are going to listen first part of the program.
Hello friends, I welcome you all to this session of Virtual Classroom. The topic that we are going to talk about today is William Shakespeare's Sonnets. As you know friends, that this is meant for the first year BA students of English literature, and it is from the second unit of poetry of the first paper entitled Literature in English from 1550 to 1750. The objectives of this lecture are that at the end of this session, you should be able to describe William Shakespeare, the playwright and poet, explain the background of his sonnets, identify the features of his sonnets. You should also be able to describe the theme of the first sonnet, from fairest creatures we desire increase. And you should also be able to appreciate critically and explain the poetic devices used in the sonnet. So friend, let us begin. You are familiar with Shakespeare, who was the greatest dramatist in English literature. And he is considered to be one of the greatest dramatists of all languages today. He was born in 1564 and died in 1616. That means that he covered the later part of 16th century and the early part of 17th century. He was born at Stratford-on-Avon in England on 25th April 1564. As already told, he was the greatest dramatist in English literature. His father, John Shakespeare, was a prominent local citizen, and he sent his son to attend the Stratford Grammar School. Unlike most writers of his time, he did not proceed to the university. Friends, this is an interesting fact because he was not as educated as many of his contemporaries. And in those days, not everyone went for higher education as today. So anyone who went for higher education always wrote something or went in for writing. Contrary to that fact, Shakespeare was not much educated. In 1582, he married Anne Hathaway, 8 years his senior. Later, he left for London and established himself as a playwright by 1592. So in a short span, you can see that he became very successful. And he became famous as one of the greatest playwrights of those times. We call Shakespeare a great dramatist because his plays enjoy popularity even today. They are performed all over the world in most of the countries where English is well understood. But they have also been translated into several languages, including Hindi, and you would be surprised that Dr. Harivansh Rai Bachchan translated many plays of Shakespeare into Hindi. Shakespeare created immortal characters like Macbeth, Shylock, Romeo and Juliet, King Lear, Hamlet, etc. His plays were regularly published with his name on the title page. Again, friends, this would appear very strange to you, and you might wonder what is so special about it. You can imagine when printing was in its infancy, not everyone got his works published, especially with his name on the title page, because usually the publisher would exclude the author and give importance to the publishing house. In such a time, Shakespeare wrote famous tragedies like Romeo and Juliet, King Lear, Hamlet, etc. with his name on the title page. He also wrote comedies, Twelfth Night, A Midsummer Night's Dream, and you have another comedy of Shakespeare prescribed for you entitled The Merchant of Venice. But very few of us know that Shakespeare was an excellent poet too. We know him only as a dramatist, but he was an excellent poet, and his poems include narrative poems like Venus and Adone, which was written in 1593, Rape of Lucrece in 1594, and The Phoenix and the Turtle in 1601. So in a short span you can see that he wrote his major famous narrative poems. But he also wrote 154 sonnets, out of which 2 are prescribed for you. His narrative poems were written around 1593, and they were dedicated to the Earl of Southampton. Actually, around 1593, the playhouses in London closed down because of plague, and so perhaps Shakespeare had ample time to devote to poetry, and his genius was not only dramatic but also poetic. The fact that he dedicated his volume to the Earl of Southampton is also important because, as you know, in those days writers did not, although Shakespeare was an exception, but writers did not earn so much as to sustain themselves without the help of someone who had money. So they obviously looked for patrons and people who would help them in their creative writing. Shakespeare wrote, unlike his narrative poems, sonnets throughout his creative life. They were scattered and written at different times. At first, they were circulated as manuscripts among friends. Now let us see what happened to them later on. Later on, they were published by Thomas Thorpe in 1609. They were compiled, these individual sonnets, which had been circulated as manuscript. They were compiled in the quarto edition of Shakespeare's works, and they were dedicated to Mr. W.H. Now again, you would say, why is dedication so important for a book? But for Shakespeare's times, when, as I said, they had to look for patrons, it was important to know because these sonnets were also addressed to this person, Mr. W.H. At least the first 126 of the sonnets are addressed to Mr. W.H. Before we proceed further, it would also be worthwhile to recapitulate that we are talking about sonnets, and in one of the earlier lectures, some of you must have seen and heard about sonnets. What sonnets are? Do you remember? Sonnets are short poems of 14 lines, and the meaning of the word sonnet is little song. So Shakespeare wrote these little songs and dedicated them to Mr. W.H. Now, the identity of Mr. W.H. seems to be a controversy. Some critics identify him as the Earl of Pembroke, while others say that he was Earl of Southampton, to whom the earlier volume was dedicated, while others identify him as Sir William Harvey. There are other contenders also for this dedication. Nevertheless, we can never surely say who Mr. W.H. actually was. Sonnet 127 onwards are dedicated to a dark lady. Now, whether she was a real woman or an allegorical interpretation of critics is not really known, but perhaps what critics agreed to is that she was perhaps the mistress of one of the persons to whom these earlier sonnets were addressed. Now, as far as themes of these sonnets are concerned, they are love, role of poetry, praise of his patrons, etc. Sometimes he's also talking about transientious beauty. So, if you remember and recall the lecture on sonnets about the evolution of sonnet, we had seen that it was Petrarch who first developed this form into full-fledged form of poetry. He compiled his sonnets, addressed them to his beloved Laura, and put them in a volume. Now this set the tradition of poetry, the sonnet poetry, sonnet writing in Italy. Later it was picked up by other poets in England, and they also used this form. They also arranged the sonnets in sonnet sequences as Shakespeare does. But the greatness of Shakespeare's sonnets lies in the fact that it is not just love poetry. He talks about other things also, as mentioned over here. Sonnet 1 to 126, that is the first to 126th sonnets, the poet is talking about his relationship with a young man, his social superior, and his patron. Now these are the sonnets. This sequence is devoted to and dedicated to the person Mr. W.H. 127 onwards, as I told you, the central character is the dark lady, and she is projected as very hard-hearted. She does not reciprocate the love that is for her. Now the first sonnet that we are going to talk about is From Fairest Creatures We Desire Increase. This sonnet is the first sonnet in the sequence of Shakespeare's sonnets, and as already mentioned, it is from the first 126 sonnets, therefore it is dedicated to Mr. W.H. Let's see what is the theme of this sonnet. The poet urges the young man, his patron, to marry and bear children. In this way, his beauty can be duplicated in the form of his children and so be preserved. So here, the poet wants the person whom he admires, his patron, that he should duplicate his beauty, his qualities in the form of his children. If he bears children, they would certainly resemble him, and therefore his good qualities would remain, would become permanent, they would not be destroyed by time. Let's see how the text goes. The first line is, From fairest creatures we desire increase, that thereby beauty's rose might never die. But as the riper should by time disease, his tender air might bear his memory. As you see that Shakespeare uses these words by and memory, which rhyme together. This pronunciation is the way they were pronounced those days. Let's see the next quatrain. If you remember the earlier lecture, we said what was a quatrain. We defined a quatrain. A quatrain is a stanza of 4 lines. So you see this first line, from fairest creatures we desire increase. The second line is that thereby beauty's rose might never die. Then you have the third line, and then you have the fourth line. So this is a unit of 4 lines, and it is called a quatrain. Let's see the second quatrain. But thou contracted to thine own bright eyes, feedest thy light's flame with self-substantial fuel, making a famine where abundance lies, thyself thy foe to thy sweet self too cruel. Again you see that these are a set of 4 lines, the first line, the second line, the third line, and the fourth line. So this is the second quatrain. And then you have the third quatrain. Thou that art now the world's fresh ornament, and only herald to the gaudy spring, within thine own bud buryest thy content, and tender churl makest waste in niggarding. So we have the next 4 lines, that is the third quatrains. So first quatrain 4 lines, second quatrain 8 lines, third quatrain 12 lines, and finally you have the couplet. Pity the world, or else this glutton be, to eat the world's due by the grave and thee. A couplet means a set of 2 lines in a poem. So you see, this is the first line and this is the second line. So we had 3 quatrains of 4 lines that made 12 lines, and finally the 2 lines that makes 14 lines. So a sonnet, as I said, is a poem of 14 lines. We saw these 14 lines. Now let us see the meaning of this sonnet. From fairest creatures, fairest beautiful creatures, we desire that they increase their beauty, that thereby beauty's rose might never die. You know that everything is transient in this world, nothing is permanent. So beauty is also very fragile, very delicate, and the rose of beauty, it is a metaphorical way of saying that beauty is like a rose in beauty and in delicacy, and also in the decaying nature of the rose. Very soon it dies. So if the fair creatures, the beautiful creatures, the good creatures, whom we desire that they increase their beauty, that their beauty might never die, what should they do? They should increase their beauty by producing offsprings. But as the riper should by time disease, riper here would mean become mature. So as beauty becomes mature with time, it decays. And when the beauty and the qualities, good qualities are decaying, his tender heir might bear his memory. The offspring, the tender offspring or the heir of the person, that tender offspring or child will bear the memory or good qualities of the person the sonnet is being addressed to. The simple meaning is that if a person wants to make his beauty or qualities permanent, they can live in the form of his offspring, and people can think about or bear his memory in their minds by looking at the child. And then the poet says to the person he is addressing the sonnet, he says, but thou contracted to thine own bright eyes. His eyes are very bright, they are very beautiful, but his beauty is confined to his own eyes. Feedest thy light's flame with self-substantial fuel. This is very interesting. This is a metaphor, and the image that the poet giving here is that his beauty is like a candle which feeds on its own wax, self-substantial fuel. The flame is fed by the wax of the candle, and it produces light, brightness and beauty, and in the process, the candle, in the process of creating brightness, itself gets extinguished, making a famine where abundance lies. This is the first picture that the poet gives. This is the second picture which he gives. He says that there is abundance of beauty in him, abundance of qualities in him, but by not duplicating them in the form of his children, he is creating a famine. He is creating a void. Once his beauty and qualities, they decay with time, there will be a famine. His qualities will no longer be there. In this manner, the person is his own enemy. Thyself, thy foe. Thy is an archaic expression. It is no longer used, which means you are yourself your foe. To thy sweet self too cruel. You are a very sweet person, but you are being very cruel to yourself. Let's see the third quatrain. What does the poet say? Thou that art now the world's fresh ornament. Thou is again you. You who are now the world's fresh ornament. You are fresh, you are young, you adorn the world with your qualities. In this sense, he is an ornament. And only herald to the gaudy spring. Gaudy here means joyous. The sweet, happy spring. So this freshness, this youth of yours can herald the greater beauty that is to come when you blossom in youth. Within thine own bud buryest thy content. You confine your beauty, you confine your qualities, you bury them in your own self, in thy content, in your own inner self. You do not let those qualities come out in the form of offsprings, and therefore they will remain inside you. You don't want to share them with others. And tender churl here means a young man. Makest waste in niggarding. Niggarding means a person who is miser. So he says, O young person, O youth, he addresses the person and says, O young one, you are making a waste of your beauty by being miser in not sharing it, in not duplicating your beauty and your good qualities. So in the final couplet he says, pity the world or else this glutton be. Who's a glutton? A glutton is a very greedy person. So he says, I pity the world because if you do not duplicate your beauty, you will be like a glutton, to eat the world's due by the grave and thee. Thee here would mean you. What is the world's due? The world's due is your beauty. You need to give the good qualities that you have and the beauty of yourself to the world. By not giving the world its due, you are destroying it, either by going to the grave with the passage of time. When death overcomes, this beauty will be buried in the grave, and it would be you who would do this. So he says, I take pity on the world, because if you do not duplicate this beauty, you will be like a glutton who is very greedy, who doesn't want to share his beauty, and his beauty will be devoured like a glutton devours food by the grave and you. So let us see what were some of the important expressions. Increase here meant future generations. Tender air was the young child which the poet wants the person to have. Then self-substantial fuel was the image of the candle which was feeding on its own wax. Gaudy was joyous. Buriest here meant both confine and also kill. After death, the body is buried inside. So after death, it buries, and therefore it is confine and kill. Content here would mean complacency or the inner self. Churl, as I told you, was a young boy, and niggarding meant behaving like a miser. Now let us see the structure and form. I briefly explained that the poem had 3 quatrains and a couplet. If you recall the rhyme scheme, it was A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, and the couplet was G, G. What does this mean? This means that the first line rhymed with the third line in the first quatrain, and the third line rhymed with the fourth line in the first quatrain. Now, the sound of the second quatrain, the end sounds, the rhymes were different. The pattern is the same. The first is rhyming with the third, and the second is rhyming with the fourth, but these are different sounds. So if this was sound A, this was a different sound which was B, then sound A was repeated in the third line, then sound B was repeated in the fourth line. In the second quatrain, we had new patterns of sound. A new sound in line 5, which was repeated in line 7, a new sound in line 6, which was repeated in line 8. This is how we describe the rhyme scheme. And in the couplet, both the lines, they rhyme together. So this was the rhyme scheme, and this is important whenever you attempt a critical appreciation of the poem. Now if you see the way sound travels in the line, you will find that each line had 5 feet. That means the pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables. So you had 5 feet, and therefore every line was a pentameter, and they were usually iambic feet. In the first quatrain, the poet had the exposition of his theme. He states the theme. He says to the young man that you are very beautiful, you need to duplicate this beauty by producing offsprings. So this was the exposition in the first quatrain. He stated the theme. In the second and the third quatrains, he elaborated this theme and exemplified it. He built up upon the same idea. So students, after stating the theme and elaborating it in the second and the third quatrain, the poet moves on to the couplet, the final 2 lines in his poem. And he concludes the little song by emphatically stating that what he said in the first quatrain, if that does not happen, then the world would be deprived of the beauty of the young man and the qualities that he has. So you see how the idea develops. It takes its origin in the first quatrain, goes on being elaborated in the second and the third quatrain, and final conclusion, a very emphatic conclusion, comes in the final 2 lines, that is the couplet. Let us now take a look at the poetic devices that the poet has used. We talked about beauty's rose, and I said that it was a metaphor. What is a metaphor? A metaphor is a comparison where you compare 2 things, 2 dissimilar things, in such a way that you juxtapose one on the other. And in this way, for example, now beauty is something which cannot be seen, which can only be felt. even if you feel the beauty, it's not something concrete, it's not something physical. And rose, it's an abstract quality. A rose is something physical, it is something which you can see, you can touch, you can feel. And by comparing these two without any word such as, like, it could have been as beautiful as a rose. If that was the case, then it would be a simile. So here, beauty's rose is a metaphor, the metaphor of beauty, because the poem is about beauty. Now, he says, within thine own bud buryest thy content. Now, bud is again something similar to a flower, that is rose. So first you have the bud and then you have the flower. So you see there is connection, the same metaphor is continuing in this line. Then he talks about another very vivid image, making famine where abundance lies. The second comparison is with the situation of famine and abundance, something which is plentiful and something which is deprived. So this is the second comparison that the poet does. The third vivid image that the poet gives us is of a lighted candle. In this manner, the poet makes three comparisons of the person's beauty and his qualities. So this is what we call, either we call it a metaphor or we call it is a general term, it is a specific term, and the general term would be the poetic devices. What are poetic devices? Things which a poet resorts to in order to create beauty in his poems. You can have metaphor, you can have simile, you can have paradox. So there are so many poetic devices. Then there is another device which was used, self-substantial fuel. Here you have the sound S and L. L in self and L in substantial, and you have S sound, S sound also there. This is called alliteration, and this also creates beauty in a poem. So let us revise what we have done so far. We talked about Shakespeare, the dramatist and the poet. We knew Shakespeare as a dramatist. Today we talked about him as a poet. Then we talked about some of his major dramatic, we referred to his dramatic works and also his poetic works. Then we talked about the sonnets of Shakespeare. We talked about their background, we talked about how they were put in a sequence, they were addressed to whom, and some of the qualities and rhyme schemes of his sonnet. We talked about first sonnet, from fairest creatures we desire increase. This is the first in the sequence. We talked about its theme, that beauty is transient and it needs to be duplicated. We also talked about the structure, the 3 quatrains and a couplet, and we saw the rhyme scheme of these quatrains and the couplet. We also talked about the poetic devices that the poet has used, the metaphors, the comparisons, the alliteration that the poet has used. So in this way, friends, we today analyze the first sonnet of Shakespeare. In the second part, we will talk about the second sonnet prescribed for you.
You were just listening to first part of an audio program, William Shakespeare's Sonnets. Subject, expert and speaker was Dr. Shubhra Tripathi. Announcer was Prem Sharan Khemaria. This audio program was edited and presented by Amar Bahadur Yadav. This program was produced by the Electronic Media Production and Research Center, EMPRC of Madhya Pradesh Bhoj Open University in association with NITTTR Bhopal.